So I think you said when you were starting out, you had some business mentors who were telling you to do certain things to market your business, and those just weren't lining up with you. That you ended up procrastinating on these things because you weren't jiving with what they were telling you. What were some of those things? What were some of the pieces of advice that you got from mentors that weren't working for you, and what did you end up doing instead that did work for you?
Yes, well, having had even though I had a doctorate degree, and I just didn't really know too much about like a clinical degree. I didn't know too much about business, and so I hired mentors from the start. And but then, the mentors that I learned from, they would tell me to do all kinds of things like, oh, you need to be always putting yourself out there, or you got to do this kind of outreach all the time and networking with a bunch of people. And oh my gosh, it just felt
Yeah.
so exhausting. and
Hmm.
and so yeah, so I, like you said, I would then just notice myself being where it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I wouldn't have done much of anything, and I thought, oh my gosh, this is not a way to run a business, and it's not gonna last long like this. So then over the years, I realized that there, for one, if you are an introvert and you're following extroverted strategies that don't really align, then it could just
Hmm.
feel like pulling teeth. And it could also feel like, if you've ever felt like you've been procrastinating a lot, maybe it is just because you don't align, or that whatever you're being taught doesn't really jive very well with how you're naturally are, like your natural
Yeah.
tendencies. For example, as myself as an introvert, so did you know that 30 to 50% of people are introverts, but what's taught about marketing and growing your practice assumes that you're an extrovert. And so that's why it doesn't really work that well. And then I feel like, actually, in the health profession and acupuncture profession, I would say that as a whole, that percentage is likely higher. I haven't seen studies on this, but you know,
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, that just the type of people that acupuncture attracts tends to be
mhm,
more alternative people. So I think if anything, that number would be much higher than maybe the general
like
population.
a more introspective kind of a person, and like inward, and so and so I think part of it, in terms of the lessons I learned, was to really go with the flow of what your natural tendencies are, whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, and do, for example, if you're an introvert, follow more introverted kind of strategies. So what do I mean by that? So, and what are some of the distinctions? Well, first, let's talk about a few distinctions between an introvert and an extrovert. So, do you end up feeling like you recharge more by curling up and reading a book versus like being around a lot of people, and having lots of noise and activity happening around you, and having to talk to a bunch of people at once, right? Like, so most introverts like to for one, recharge that way, to curl up and read a book, and also prefer to have like less, like they tend to do better with more quiet and calm around them, environmental wise, instead of like fewer people, getting to know fewer people well, and having deeper relationships with them, rather than getting to know a whole bunch of people, and extend yourself energetically to a ton of people, and especially lots and lots of people at once. And then another characteristic of an introvert also is, sometimes, as introverts, might also talk more slowly than extroverts do. And this is one of the reasons for that is because introverts and extroverts process differently. So an extrovert, it receives that whatever is coming across, and they just process it at the same time. And an introvert, they receive it, and then like there's a little bit of a delay, and then they're processing. And so, for example, I used to beat myself up about this. I would talk slowly at times. I mean, sometimes I talk
Hmm.
quickly, but sometimes I also
Yeah.
talk very slowly.
Yeah.
And I used to think something was wrong with me. I was like, am I just slower than other people?
Yeah.
but but it's actually could be a characteristic, as an introvert? And also have you ever felt if you're listening to this and wondering if you're an introvert, like, have you ever felt like in those group situations where maybe in school you were asked to be in a group and workshop things together, or maybe since you've been out of school, you were in group situations, and in your group, other people had all these ideas, and you were still processing, and then you had like something witty the next day that you felt like you should have said.
Yeah.
So if those are some of the things that like they ring true for you, then you're likely you're an introvert, or you have tendencies towards being an introvert. And so so that's one thing. And then so if that's the case, then also the other thing is to then explore what strategies actually feel like they're in alignment and in a flow, so that you're not always pushing against like, oh, I gotta be like going out there and networking today, getting dressed up and network with a bunch of people. Oh, this is not my thing, and but I got to do it anyway because otherwise I'm not going to get patients, and so I got to muster up the such and such, and then only to do it and feeling like, oh my gosh, this is so exhausting and it wasn't very productive. Or getting caught up in the whole social media thing, like, because that's kind of the buzz these days, isn't it? It's like, oh, you got to be on social media, but then honestly, like a lot of the acupuncturists I've talked to, it's very rare that someone will say, oh yeah, I get all my patients through social media. And so this idea of having to constantly put yourself out there every single day and constantly post on social media or do videos and do these song and dance reels and all that kind of thing, it's just like, it can feel so exhausting for us introverts. So it's really about finding alignment with strategies that make the most sense. So for example, when our clients work with us at Introverted Visionary, that's the first thing we determine, like what makes sense for you and what feels good, right? And what tends to be most effective based off of what we're seeing right now, so that you could just focus on like one or two things and do them really, really well. And then not have to always feel like you need to spread yourself too thin. So
Yeah, because I've definitely had that experience. I had some very extroverted roommates, and there would be things like we'd be at school all day or we'd be at work all day, and then we'd come home and like, I just want to go be by myself. And they'd be like, oh, look, Sarah's coming over. Let's go say hi to Sarah. I'm like, no, I'm not going to go. And I felt bad because I thought, oh, he's just being antisocial. He's being rude. Like, no, I just spent all day around people. I need some time to recharge.
Yes.
But is there ever a point where you just have to say, you own a business now, sometimes there are things you have to do that you're uncomfortable doing. Like, for example, I really don't like talking on the phone with people. I'm one of those people that gets scared talking on the phone, to the point where my voicemail message actually says, if you want to schedule an appointment, please send me a text message or go to my website. I just don't answer my phone. Is there ever a point where you have to say, sorry, you own a business now. Talking to people on the phone is part of being in business. Get over it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a part about like being in honor of your flow and energy, and then there's also the part of stepping outside of your comfort zone, which is like, are you doing things just because you're not comfortable, because there might be some blocks related to that, and that's why you're not comfortable, right? And so going an introverted approach doesn't mean that you just never do anything that's not comfortable. It just means being in honor of your energy and flow, so that you're not always working against the grain of yourself. But there are also things that are important to become comfortable or learn certain things, because sometimes it's because you just haven't done it before, so that's why you're not comfortable, or sometimes it's because there might be previous traumatic experiences related to it. So for example, one of the strategies that our clients tend to come to us for is well, there are a couple of them, but one of them is to educate patients and educate the lay public by speaking, so virtually or in person. And at a first glance, sometimes when people hear that, they're like, oh, wow, really? Like, but then introverts, do they even speak at all? Kind of thing, or when introverts want to speak, because don't they just not want to speak? But actually, some of the most like, for example, Robin Williams, right? He is an actor, right? He's an introvert, like he speaks. so, and so it's not about that. It's more of like, again, honoring your energy flow and talents. But as an introvert, so what's the difference between, for one, first let's talk about the strategy and why it's really helpful and why it works, and let's talk about like how we can do it differently as an introvert, so we don't exhaust ourselves and we're more effective at it, right? So the strategy of attracting patients by educating and speaking is why does it work so well? Is because one of the reasons why people aren't coming to you yet is because they don't know about you and how you could help them. And some of them don't really quite understand acupuncture either. They've heard of it a little bit before, but they're a little skeptical, or they're not really sure. Does it hurt? Things like that. And so if you're able to educate people more and more about it, then that's when our people will understand, and that's when our healthcare system will start to become more integrated as well. And people are asking for it, and they're like, oh, this is just more of an everyday kind of part of healthcare, instead of it being this acupuncture thing. So then that's why it's so helpful to be able to educate and also have leverage, because then, especially as an introvert, you don't have you might not have as much bandwidth as an extrovert to always be on, right? But if you are able to educate and reach more people at once, then you could do fewer networking kinds of things, and instead you could reach 20 people at once, and or even more at once, and then you're done, like for a couple weeks or a month. We have clients who, using our structures and systems, like they just do one talk a month, and then they're good for the month in terms of patient flow, and even longer than that, right? Like longer than a month. So and then now, as far as, but how could you do it in a way that is that feels good as an introvert? And it's by being effective at it. So this is where, if you are just feeling like, okay, I'm just going to educate and then kind of wait for patients to come in from it, it may not necessarily translate into patients, because
Yeah.
most acupuncturists aren't really used to. Most of you aren't really used to doing a talk for the purpose, or educating for the or webinar or virtual, or right,
Yeah.
for the purpose of educating and to inspire new patients to come from it. So if you're not used to that, and
Yeah.
then even if you end up sharing some good things and helpful information, people may not come in. So
Well, yeah, like there has to be some sort of call to action. You can't just say, here's acupuncture. There has to be an additional step of a call to action to transition them into a patient.
And then, what do you say, and in a way that feels comfortable. So these are the kinds of things that we help our clients with. And so, for example, just